Greetings, filthlings, like our friend Danny would say. Welcome back to the channel. Today is a dark and gloomy day outside and perfect for this worst to best list from one of my favorite bands of all time, Cradle of Filth. A band that, how can you not love with those beautifully haunted and eerie and dark passages that are also so elegant and poetic and accompanied with that black metal side and the incredible lyricism by Danny Filth. I discovered this band back in 2004 with the song and the video for Nymphetamine, a very accessible song, perfect for me at the time, a time in which I was not really into extreme metal at all. But I remember absolutely loving that song and checking out the rest of Cradle of Filth discography. And at the time, it didn't click for me because I still wasn't yet accustomed to that kind of sound. But later in the years, as the years went by and I got more into extreme metal, I was always fascinated by the cover artworks, by the gothic, elements of the music, by the atmosphere. And eventually I remember seeing Cradle of Filth live in 2011, and I was so impressed by the show. And I remember back then the song Lilith Immaculate. Hearing that song live, it really stuck into my brain. And from then on, I became a fan because I returned home, I listened to the song, I loved it. I know it's not even one of their most popular songs, but for me, it just got stuck in my head, and I loved it. And shortly afterwards, I bought Cruelty and the Beast, and that was the beginning of my journey. But anyway, let's start with this ranking. I'm not gonna include EPs, unfortunately. So no The Empire, of course, no Bittersweet Sweet to Succubi, because that's a compilation. We're only gonna delve into the actual studio albums from Cradle of Filth. So stay tuned. So last position and last place of this ranking is 2012's Manticore and Other Horrors. And in theory, I should have a deep and emotional connection to this album because this was the first brand new release by Cradle of Filth that I got as a fan, because as I said, I got into Cradle of Filth around 2011, so this was the first brand new release I was really eagerly awaiting for. And I remember that back at the time, I actually did listen to this quite a lot, and I kind of liked it. But over the years, it grew very stale. It has kind of that heavy metal / punky attitude. The songs are very direct. It has some electronic moments even. The songs really don't stick. There are some highlight moments for me. Like, for example, Frost on Her Pillow is probably the only song to which I actually go back to in this album. The Abhorrent, this first track, isn't bad. Succumb to This is very, very catchy. But this album to me is simply lacking of inspiration, and it was right for Cradle of Filth at that point to change their lineup. Their historic guitarist Paul Allender left the band after this album, but basically their whole lineup changed, except for, of course, Danny Filth. And it was a breath of fresh air because I feel that this lineup had come to a point where they really weren't making any good music anymore. And so it was time for change, and they changed for the best because the next three albums, as we will see, are actually very good. Not surprisingly, my second least favorite album by Cradle of Filth is Thornography, released in 2006. And to me, this is kind of a sister album to Nymphetamine, because it's got that kind of commercial vibe that Nymphetamine had, but Nymphetamine did excel, I think, in some cuts, or at least it was an inspired album. This just isn't. It feels to me like the B-sides of that previous album. Not that there aren't some good songs on this, and that's why I'm ranking it higher than Manticore and Other Horrors, because, for example, Under a Huntress Moon is a gorgeous and twisted and exciting adventure, and it's honestly a great song. Dirge Inferno is pretty catchy and pretty good, And I also love The Fetus of a New Day Kicking. That one has a very, very catchy chorus that always gets stuck in my head. Rise of a Pentagram is a decent instrumental. Temptation, I feel, is a terrible, terrible cover, and I don't understand how people can like this song. Yeah, but overall, the majority of this album to me is just very, very boring, very lackluster in terms of inspiration, and I'm actually surprised that a lot of people seem to like this album, but no, definitely not me. And I gave this so many tries, but it just never clicked. Apart from those songs that I mentioned. So, second last, Thornography. Next up on the list is the album Darkly, Darkly Venus Versa, which for me was quite an important album. This was released in 2010, and in 2011, as I said, I saw them live for the first time, and I heard the song Lilith Immaculate, and that chorus just got stuck in my head like forever. And to the point that after Cruelty and the Beast, which was the first album that I actually bought by Cradle of Filth, this was the second album I chose to buy just because of that song. And I have to say, I have to show you the vinyl because I absolutely love this cover artwork. It's so Tim Burton-ish. It's got, yeah, so many Tim Burton vibes. So dark. This is a concept album on Lilith, the second wife of Adam, and it's very, very brutal and very black metal oriented, but it also has a very, very gothic inspired atmosphere. And to me, the songs that really stand out are the ones with the spoken word passages by their female keyboardist at the time. I love her British pronunciation. And for example, the song that opens Cult of Venus Versa, I think has some pretty cool moments, especially in the intro and when the song kicks in. It's such a blast. Of course, I already mentioned Lilith Immaculate, which I think is an incredible song. And also Beyond the 11th Hour is another cut that I really love with that spoken intro. All mirrors lead to my palace, my exotic pleasure temple, etc., etc. Yeah, that's always so compelling. The rest of the album kind of comes and goes for me. I listen to this a ton, but for some reason, a lot of the other songs can't seem to stick in my head, really. Spawn of Love and War is kind of good, and the Persecution song is kind of good, but on the whole, this album is very long and very samey in its structure and in its compositions. And there aren't that many like wow moments in it, except for the songs I mentioned. So that's why I'm gonna put it a little low in the ranking. But I don't dislike it at all. Okay, next one is Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder, released in 2008. And what a 360 turn this album is musically from their previous effort, Thornography. This is a crushingly devastating, brutal black metal album dealing with a very controversial subject. This is a concept album on Gilles de Rais, who was a French nobleman and also a murderer and a pedo and so many other things. Very, very controversial and evil character. And Cradle of Filth has always seemed to have this fascination for these kind of characters. After all, they made a concept album about Elizabeth Bathory, so I mean, that says it all. Yeah, I mean, this album has some really fantastic moments, like The Death of Love is absolutely stunning with that beautiful chorus sung by that female vocalist. I'm not sure even about her name, and I don't think she was actually part of the band. She was probably a guest musician at the time, but that song is beautiful, it's elegant, it's amazing. And the rest of this album has some other good songs like Tragic Kingdom, Shout Out of Hell is got so furious. The blast beats are absolutely unrelenting on this song. And another one I feel is a very good song is the title track, Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder. Overall, I think, again, this album is a little bit samey, and I kind of do prefer the albums in which Cradle of Filth involve a female vocalist in a lot of their songs because it gives some variety and dynamic to the album. This is okay. It has some standout moments. I like revisiting it, but it's definitely not one of my favorite albums from Cradle of Filth. Still pretty good. Now, before we go on with the ranking, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It's something very easy for you to do, but it would make a ton of difference for me. And so let's go on with a ranking. Position number 9, and I'm sorry if I have to censor the cover, but just to be sure, I'm not sure if YouTube will like it. Cryptoriana, The Seductiveness of Decay, released in 2017. And this, to me, is their weakest album amongst their last 3 with a new lineup. And when I say weakest album, I'm still calling this a very good album. I mean, this is infused with Victorian Gothic horror. It's very poetic and atmospheric. This has Lindsay Schoolcraft on it, doing vocals and doing keyboards. Sadly, it would be the last album to feature Lindsay Schoolcraft, and she does an amazing job with her, clean singing. There are some amazing cuts here. My favorite is Vespertine, which might be one of my favorite Cradle of Filth songs. I'd say post 2000s. But, the seductiveness of Decay, the title track, has some amazing, almost new wave of British heavy metal guitar playing going on. And it's such an incredible song. Also, if you look at the technicality of the instrument and the guitar playing, this is infused with guitar solos and, as I said, heavy metal riffage. And yeah, it's such a compelling album. Achingly Beautiful is another song I really like. Heartbreak and Science. Maybe the last part of the album dips a little bit in quality, just for my taste. But still, this album to me is really, really solid. So, position number 9, Cryptoriana, The Seductiveness of Decay. Okay, next up is a really, really special album to me, and one that always brings me back to my teenage years, and was actually my introduction to Cradle of Filth, and this is the album Nymphetamine from 2004. What an amazing cover artwork. And of course, I discovered the band with the song Nymphetamine Fix that was constantly on rotation on MTV. What an incredibly beautiful song. And I might be in the minority in saying this, but I do prefer the shortened version of Nymphetamine Fix rather than the overly long and meandering Nymphetamine Overdose, which to me has some, stale and not so original guitar passages. And it's unnecessarily really long for the purpose of the song. And to me, the short 4-minute version is so perfect and so beautiful that there wasn't really no use in making it 10 minutes long. But that being said, the rest of the album is really, really beautiful. A totally different Cradle of Filth compared, to the previous Damnation and Day. Much more commercial sounding. All the orchestrations, the massive orchestrations they used on Damnation and the Day. Here we're gone. The sound is much more stripped, much more guitar driven, but there are some amazingly beautiful moments on the piano. And basically, almost all the symphony that comes from this album is driven by the piano, and there are some gorgeous, gorgeous piano intros, like the one in English Fire and on the song Absinthe with Faust. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Aside from that, this is a very thrashy record at time. For example, with the intro song Gilted Cunt, I always loved it. Another one I really loved right from the get-go. I remember right when I listened to this album for the first time in 2004, even though I wasn't fully into it because I wasn't that much into extreme music, even though this isn't really extreme at all. But I remember loving a song like Gabrielle, for instance, and to me that still is one of the big highlights of this album. Also, this album closes in a fantastic way with songs like Swan Song for a Raven and Mother of All Abominations. Also, yeah, this album has some quite nice, again, more heavy metal moments, heavy metal guitar passages. on the song Coffin Fodder. And I think this is an inspired album, and I always love revisiting it. It might not be as good as their masterpieces, but it still holds a very special place in my heart. So, eighth place for Nymphetamine. Next up is the debut album by Cradle of Filth, 1994's The Principle of Evil Made Flesh, distributed by Cacophonous Records. And this one made the list of my top 15 favorite debut albums of all time, and I've made a video for that, so if you want to watch it. And yeah, this is only at position number 7, yet it's one of my favorite debut albums of all time, and this goes to show how great Cradle of Filth is. Anyway, this album has a stellar lineup. I mean, Danny Filth, the great Nicholas Barker on drums, Paul Allender, who would eventually leave the band after this album and rejoin on Midian. You got Robin Graves, you got Paul Ryan and Benjamin Ryan, guitars and keyboards respectively. This album is raw, it's unpolished, but it's also beautiful and elegant. And the only fault I have for this album isn't actually the production in itself, which I think fits to the atmosphere of the album, but it's more Danny Filth's performance. He is not yet the vocalist that he would become in the subsequent albums. He doesn't have that range, that dynamic, that theatricality. If you think about, for example, the song Black Goddess Rises, that song was remade on Bittersweets to Succubi. And on that song, you can hear how Danny was way more theatrical and interesting in his delivery. Think about the line in which he says, "Oh, how I craved for you," etc., etc. That part. He delivers it in a much more theatrical way and in a much more compelling way. Yeah, and to be fair, I think that Danny really reaches his pinnacle in the era between Midian and Damnation and a Day. But aside from that, I think this album has some incredible songs. Title track Black Goddess Rises, Summer Dying Fast, The Forest Whispers My Name. Every song here is really, really good. It's really strong. There are some interludes which are really interesting. It's really fantastic and incredible debut album by Cradle of Filth. Next up, we have the amazing comeback album by Cradle of Filth, and this is Hammer of the Witches, released in 2015. What an inspired an amazing album this is. I remember I couldn't believe what I was hearing back in 2015 when I heard this record after, the very mediocre Manticore and Other Horrors. This album starts with a bang with the song Yours Immortally, with that chorus that just gets stuck in my head every time, standing by the cliff. That kiss burning winds, we have risen together, with that amazing shrieking voice by Danny Filth. Another cut that I really, really love is the song Blackest Magic Put in Practice, that is more like melancholic and reminiscent and nostalgic. It has a beautiful vibe to it. I absolutely love the phrase, I think upon the times, those golden summers of love echo so sublime, as do winters drinking too much festive wine. And then with those harmonizing vocals by Lindsay Schoolcraft. And by the way, this was the first album featuring Lindsay Schoolcraft on vocals, and she does an amazing job, not just on the harmonizing vocals, but on the lead vocals as well. I love her parts on the title track when she says, "I say, toll the demon bell." That sounds so dramatic, so great. And also the passage she has on Right Wing of the Garden Triptych, with that Queen of Winter throne. Amazing part as well. This album has banger after banger. I'm not maybe that big of a fan of the last two songs, The Vampire at My Side and Onward Christian Soldiers. I mean, they're okay, they're not bad, but compared to the rest, not to the same level. But wow, what an amazing comeback album, Cradle of Filth. Great album. Okay, we're entering the top 5, but before we do, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It's something very, very easy for you to do, but it would make a ton of difference for me. And also be a bit aware that this is just the appetizer. We're gonna be talking way more about Cradle of Filth as we go on with this channel. Lots more videos on this band. But for now, let's continue with the video. Number 5, we got Existence is Futile, released in 2021. And man, honestly, I can't recall of another legacy band with 30 years on their shoulders releasing an album that is so incredibly, in fact, impactful and inspired and amazing. Like, this one really blew my mind. Plus, it's such a diverse album. It picks from so many different musical styles, and that makes it even more compelling. Think about Existential Terror, which is so thrashy and heavy, and it's so guitar driven, and has such amazing lead parts. Think about the amazing masterpiece, Black Smoke Curling from the Lips of War, which is a total black metal feast with Annabelle again doing some amazing clean vocal parts and some amazing harmonizing. Once again, the Cradle of Filth got another great female vocalist in the band after the parting with Lindsay Schoolcraft, and it's such a shame that she only played on this album, and afterwards she was gone, and apparently Cradle of Filth now have another female vocalist. But anyway, Annabelle did such an amazing job on this album, not just on this song, but on the intro, for example, of The Dying of the Embers, which reminds me a lot of the beginning of Beyond the 11th Hour, which is so ominous and like eerie and dark, and her voice is so like potent and compelling. Discourse Between a Man and Its Soul is another song that to me is very fascinating. It reminds me musically a little bit of the album Nymphetamine in parts. It's a very intimate song where there's a man almost having a discourse and a confrontation with its demons. It's very personal, very beautiful, very grandiose, very symphonic. And then there's Crawling King Chaos that has basically everything in it. And then you got another kind of heavy metal, new wave of British heavy metal sounding song with How Many Tears to Nurture a Rose, which is honestly like a bone-chilling song. Incredible. And Us Dark Invisible is such a great way of like closing the album, so catchy. Us Dark Invincible, Us Dark Invincible. And also, the 2 bonus tracks are incredibly well done. I mean, Unleash the Hellion, Stitches of a Mist, these are really, really good bonus tracks. Yeah, honestly, I was floored when this album came out, and this is one of my favorite Cradle of Filth albums. So, spot number 5, Existence is Futile. At position number 4, we got the amazing, sprawling, 78-minute concept album Damnation in a Day, loosely based on John Milton's Paradise Lost. And for this album, Cradle of Filth was signed to Sony after the amazing success of Midian. They had a huge budget for this album, so much that they involved a 101 Hungarian piece orchestra, if I'm not mistaken. And this gives this album such a diverse sound and a diverse quality to it compared to the previous albums, in which the symphonic side was mainly driven by the keyboards. But here you have those massive orchestral parts. And maybe this album isn't like the best for newcomers. It's a bit too much due to its length and due to the grandiose symphonic parts in it. And at least for me, it took a while to grow on me, the whole album, because I did love the singles right from the get-go. And I'm talking, of course, about Hurt and Virtue, Babylon AD, So Glad for the Madness, Mannequin, Thank God for the Suffering, which is such an amazing and beautiful song. Uh, the rest of the album slowly grew on me, and man, it slowly but surely became one of my favorite Cradle of Filth records of all time. This is divided in 4 acts. Um, yeah, it's a very, very ambitious project by Cradle of Filth. I feel that one of the best songs comes at the very end with the smoke of her burning. Wow, what an amazing powerhouse of a song, as well as being the promise of Fever, when that you know blast beats come in and Danny's shriek comes in. Wow, it gives me goosebumps. And another one, a great one, is an enemy led the tempest. Another incredible song, Serpent Tongue, Carry On. This is filled with amazing, amazing songwriting. Maybe, yeah, again, I wouldn't recommend it to a newcomer. I would go with albums more like Midian or Nymphetamine, which are more accessible, or even their classics, Cruelty and Dusk. But wow, what an amazing album this is. Position number 4, Damnation and a Day. Next song on my list is the amazing Midian at position number 3, released in 2000. An amazing success for the band. What an amazing cover. I also have it on vinyl behind my back, as you can see. And, this album features the actor Doug Bradley doing some narration and some spoken word passages. I feel it has the last real big contributions by vocalist Sarah Jezebel Deva, unfortunately, but she does an amazing job on bringing to life one of the best songs Cradle of Filth ever recorded, and that is to me Her Ghost in the Fog. And that I love Danny's lyricism in that song. I absolutely love the dark and ominous but also elegant way in which Danny Filth describes the atmosphere preceding the crime, in which the young woman is about to be raped and murdered by men of the church, and he refers to that night as that frightful eve where the trees stank of sunset and camphor, and the lanterns chase the phantoms and threw an inquisitive glance like the shadows they cast on my love-picking rue by the light of the moon. One of my favorite Cradle of Filth lyrics ever, one of my favorite songs ever by Cradle of Filth. But this album is full of incredible, incredible songs. Opening with the ominous and furious Cthulhu Dawn. Saffron's Curse is another one of my favorite Cradle of Filth songs. That amazing symphonic explosion at the end with those blast beats always gives me goosebumps. In Lord Abortion, Danny sounds so theatrical. There's a middle section when he sounds so incredibly theatrical. Another incredible song, Amore Morte, is very symphonic. Tearing the Veil from Grace is an absolute masterpiece. Tortured Soul Asylum is an incredible way to close off the album. What can I say? Midian combines the amazing songwriting with an amazing production, and the two make this album a really special one. So number 3, Midian. So for me, deciding between position number 1 and number 2 is really, really hard. These are two of my favorite albums of all time, but for the sake of this ranking, I'm going to go with number 2, Dusk and Her Embrace, released in 1996, one of the best albums of the 90s, one of my favorite albums of all time. This combines the gothic element, the black metal elements, the brutality and the atmosphere and the elegance in such an amazing way. Sarah Jezebel Deva really, really shines on this album with her spoken word passages, and I feel that at the beginning, that was for me the element that really drew me into, appreciating this sound Cradle of Filth had on this album. And eventually, that was the key that drew me. And then, like, listening and re-listening to the songs, I just fell in love with this record. It's one of my favorite albums of all time, as I said. And, Cradle of Filth is so special in how they combine the elements of those brutal elements with those elegant and gothic atmospheres. It's like, if I had to make a comparison, a horror movie. You know, I'm not really into those splatter horror movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I rather prefer those movies where the director really creates that chilling and haunted atmosphere. And this to me is like represents the music of Cradle of Filth, because yeah, it is kind of dark and brutal, but it's also very elegant and atmospheric most of the times. And yeah, I mean, I don't even have to mention all these songs because like they're all masterpieces. But if I have to, like my favorites, Funeral and Carpathia, um, Gothic Romance, Red Roses for a Devil's Whore, Dusk and Her Embrace, the title track, Haunted Shores with Kronos from Venom doing the spoken word passages. Uh, yeah, I mean, everything here is absolutely perfect. It's a masterpiece. It's a work of art. Dusk and Her Embrace, 1996, position number 2. So, of course, number 1 goes to Cruelty and the Beast, the amazing concept album about Elizabeth Bathory, released in 1998, an absolute classic for the genre. And the reason I'm putting this at number 1, because as I said, these two albums always have been neck and neck for me, but Cradle did something very cool in the last years, and that is they remastered and remixed the album. Now, I am one that usually hates these kind of operations because, in spite of all the flaws that an original album has, it's those little flaws that make that album special to me. And so I usually don't like these kind of operations, but in this case, it wasn't a re-recording, it was just a remastering, and plus, like, this album is so incredibly inspired, but so incredibly lacking in production. Honestly, the sound of the drums by Nicholas Barker, which is an incredible extreme metal drummer, is honestly terrible. The guitars sound terrible. Despite this, it's still a masterpiece. But I love the way they redid the album here, because they gave more weight to the guitars. The drum sound finally sounds good, and this is the reason why I love this album so much. And I honestly prefer it to the original version now. Like when I listen to Cruelty and the Beast now, I listen to this album, and it usually doesn't happen for me with these legacy acts that re-record or remaster their albums. But with this one, that's what happened. Anyway, this album tells the stories and portrays the story of the infamous Countess Elizabeth Bathory, one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of mankind, and it's very gruesome. But at the same time, like with any Cradle of Filth record, it's very elegant. Yeah, the album starts off with 13 Autumns and a Widow, and this to me is a really perfect starting point, explaining how Elizabeth, due to a traumatic experience that she faced when she was only 13 years old, she lost her faith in God, and she embraced that dark side that she had inside of her. That's perfectly portrayed in the lyrics, Rape to Faith, she now embraced, an narcissistic unrest frozen on the mirror's face. And also, Elizabeth laughed, 13 autumns had passed, and she was now free of God and her wrath, finally. Yeah, such an incredibly opener for a song. In the song, Cruelty Brought the Orchids, Elizabeth basically makes a pact with the devil, in which she promises to sacrifice some human victims, and in exchange for their blood, she was gonna be granted the gift of not aging. And so Cruelty brought the orchids because the orchids represent, like, beauty. Beneath the Howling Stars has such a bone-chilling start to the song with those keyboards and those blast beats and Danny screaming, "Midwinter wrongs their rights of spring her spinal chill rakes the earth. Very, very elegant, but also very clever line with that like play of words between right and rights. What can I say? This album is just incredible from start to finish. Lost More and Orgasm, Battery Aria, such a dramatic song, 10-minute, incredibly atmospheric song, and basically closes the curtains on Elizabeth's life. And this album is, again, one of my favorite albums of all time, one of the best metal records of the 90s, like, no doubt about it. An amazing, amazing masterpiece, and probably I am gonna do a deep analysis of the concept of this album at some point. So if you are liking this video, if you love Cradle of Filth, stay tuned, subscribe to my channel. And so, this was a pretty long video. Hope you enjoyed it. As I said, if you're a fan of Cradle of Filth, subscribe to the channel. And without further ado, see you on the next video.